Good morning. It is Monday, August 17th, and I'm going to be starting a new weekly reading vlog. I just wrapped up my last one and was talking about kind of where I was in what I'm currently reading, which is Royal Assassin. I'm currently about 50 pages in at the start of this reading vlog, so we'll see how much progress I can make this week. I certainly am not going to finish this week. This is 675 pages, I think. Yeah, 675 pages of small text, and it's, you know, adult political fantasy. I think there's 27 hours left of the audiobook. So not anticipating finishing this week, so this will be my physical priority, and I'm just not really planning on anything else. Audibly, I am about a third of the way through This Alien Shore by C.S. Friedman, and I kind of talked a little bit about this at the end of my last vlog of just I'm overall enjoying it. I'm going to talk more about it, I think, in my next check-in once I'm a little bit farther. So that's going to be my first audiobook priority. I also, my hold for The Damned came in through the library, and that's the second book after The Beautiful by Renee Audier, and so I'm going to be listening to, I think that's going to be my next one, just because I need to make sure I listen to it before I return it to the library. So The Damned is probably going to be my next audiobook priority. That'll probably honestly last me for the rest of the week. If I can start another one, I'll probably start Born Both by Hida Valoria, who is an intersex advocate. Probably my focus this week will be This Alien Shore and The Damned. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to everything I'm currently reading / what I have on the horizon. So should be a good reading week, and I will check in later. Bye. Okay, it's Sunday afternoon. Meant to check in earlier this week, but it's fine. There's actually a lot to catch up on. So I finished This Alien Shore by C.S. Friedman, and this cover looks like it has fantasy elements, but it is pure sci-fi. This cover art was actually done by the same guy who's doing some of the Stormlight Archive covers, or the cover art. Anyway, but this follows, I thought it was super interesting. I really enjoyed this one. I listened to it on audio. I thought the narrator did a really good job. I think there were still some things I missed listening to it on audio though, so I think I'm going to reread this physically as well at some point, and you know, kind of go from there. But I really enjoyed this story. It follows kind of two different threads that ultimately kind of tie together. You follow Jamesia, and she was kind of, after an explosion on her habitat, she was told by her mentor that she needed to leave, and you know, so he's basically sending her in an away pod and gives her some information. She's like, I can't protect you anymore, I'm sorry, you need to go. So she is trying to get somewhere safe, and it follows her trying to leave and trying to get somewhere out of the way, get somewhere safe, and trying to figure out who she can trust to help her along the way. And you also follow, so kind of the background of this world is that so humans, a while before the story is set, kind of tried to colonize different areas or different planets, and realized along the way that they're in that process of space travel, people would undergo these genetic mutations that were causing a lot of problems. And so they kind of stopped colonizing other places. They kind of basically abandoned these other places and no longer were able to travel to them or give them resources. Some of the colonies still managed to survive and thrive and ultimately, you know, build up, but you know, there still were problems with space flight. And there at one point was a discovery that allowed for a certain group to be able to help navigate and kind of help pilot people through space, but they basically have, and they formed the Guild. It's a company that basically now has a monopoly on space travel. And there is a virus that is affecting some of the pilots in, I think it's mostly in the outer planets, but there's a virus that's affecting some of these pilots and killing them. And so it follows the Guild trying to figure out why some of their pilots are being attacked, figure out what they can do about it. And so there's a lot of interesting technology. Technology is actually integrated into people in very interesting ways. It was it was very interesting. It's kind of a sci-fi mystery, and so it's not like a super action-packed story. It definitely is focused on some of the characters, Jamesia, and you follow a bunch of other points of view of some programmers who are trying to figure out this virus, and the guild, and you're following quite a few perspectives as people are going through and trying to solve these mysteries. So it was super interesting, and I would definitely recommend it. A sci-fi mystery kind of appeals to you. I then tried to listen to The Damned by Renee Audier on audio. My hold from the library came in, and I ultimately am gonna go back to that physically. I realized that I need to reread the first one, and the narrator's voice during Bastion's chapters was very distracting to me, and so I don't think audio is going to be the way for me to go with those. And so I'm probably going to reread the first one. It's probably going to be next October, because those are super fun October books. So I'm probably going to reread it like over a year from now, next October. Reread the first one physically, find a copy of the second one physically, maybe through my library, and just go from there. Anyway, so I tried it, didn't quite work, but that's how it goes sometimes. I then listened to Lifting as We Climb by Yvette Dion. This is fantastic, would recommend. So I mentioned earlier in the month reading Votes for Women, and that followed, Seneca Falls to 1820 through the lens of 3 white women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Alice Paul. And I mean, obviously they did incredibly important work and are important figures in the suffrage movement to talk about. But I knew that there was so much there that author wasn't talking about, and in particular was sidelining a lot of the Black women who were also an incredibly important part of that movement. And so I wanted to fill in that gap. And this book was a suggestion on Scribd after I finished listening to Votes for Women on Scribd. I was like, that would be perfect, and I'm really, really glad I read it. So she really fills in, as I said, a lot of the information that I was looking for. So she starts before Seneca Falls and really talks about really starts with abolition and kind of starts with Reconstruction, and starts with a lot of what the women were facing at the time, particularly Black women, and kind of their realization. So for white women, it tended to be they just wanted kind of more political and economic power, and that's kind of why they wanted the right to vote. But for Black women, it was like, we need to first focus on like not getting lynched, and then so that there were a lot of different things that Black women were facing that white women were not, that led to some different and interesting intersections of the abolition and suffrage movement even before Seneca Falls. And it follows Seneca Falls, a lot of Black women not being able to participate in meetings like that, or very, very slowly being accepted to meetings like that, and for some of them just excluded altogether, forming their own organizations, doing a lot of their own organizing and a lot of their own work to be able to be a part of those conversations and really push the white abolitionists to say, you really need to be incorporating us into your movement. We're going to be stronger together, and also we very much have a dog in this fight as well, and any of the reasons that you have to want the right to vote, we also have as much if not a stronger reason, because it is very, very life-threatening. Like literally, our lives are more at stake here than yours. And so she follows this conversation. She follows some of the ways the abolition and suffrage movement work together, and then some of the things that happened that kind of made them pitted against each other and made it a question of like Black men getting the right to vote versus educated white women getting the right to vote, and kind of who should go first, and Black women being left out of both sides of that conversation, and trying to again get back into those conversations and say, why is it a matter of Black men versus educated white women getting the right to vote? This is ridiculous. So she follows that conversation. She follows through 1920. After that, you know, Black women then needing to fight Jim Crow laws, needing to fight the pushback from Brownie Board of Education, kind of the consistent fights and additional work that they needed to do just to have the same basic rights as white women. And you know, still she follows, you know, even to today, she you know, has a lot of conversations in this book about the new ways that people are being excluded from voting, voter ID laws, you know, different voting places in Black communities being closed down, early voting in those communities also being restricted. You know, specifically talks about the governor election in Georgia that Stacey Abrams was a part of, and kind of talks about, you know, that was an example of all of these elements coming together to eventually prevent a Black woman from being elected. And so she talks a lot about that. So it definitely filled in a lot of the gaps that I was looking to be filled. It's a pretty short book, and I know you know, no book is going to cover everything, right? But it definitely helped fill in some of the things that I knew were missing from the other book. So that was great. Would highly recommend checking it out for just some other context and some more information that I think is important about the history and the present day situation that surrounds the rights of Black women to vote. So that was super interesting. I then turned to the audiobook of Born Both by Hida Valoria. Hida is an intersex advocate, and so it's been a super interesting memoir so far. And yeah, so I'll talk more about that probably next week's vlog is probably when I'm going to finish it. And otherwise, I'm just continuing on with Royal Assassin. I think I'm, 125 pages in at this point? So I'll talk more about that one probably tomorrow morning. I'll see if I can get some more reading done tonight and talk about it more tomorrow morning as I'm closing out this vlog. But that's my progress so far this week. Definitely some good stuff in there. And so I'll check in tomorrow morning. And it is now Monday morning. So I basically yesterday just did a little bit more physical reading in Royal Assassin and got a little bit further in Born Both by Hida Valoria. So yeah, it's been a really good reading week. So yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more about Royal Assassin. I think I'm really enjoying it. I'm now 136 pages in, and things are starting to pick up a bit. I mean, I expect this to be a slow series from the first one. This is a really slow character-based fantasy story. So I don't mean it's finally getting started as like a negative thing. It just, I knew it was going to take a while to kind of go from the events of the end of the last book and kind of have the main character kind of get back into the swing of things. And so I still adore Fitz. I still think he's fun to follow. I think some new characters that are coming into play are going to be really fun to follow. And yeah, so I'm just still very intrigued to continue reading and just kind of see what shenanigans Fitz can get into and just kind of see him grow. So I'm thoroughly enjoying this, honestly. And I'm very excited to continue. It's definitely going to take a while. I'll probably be reading this for the rest of the month, honestly, because it just is, yeah, it's just a long book and it's going to take a minute, but I'm definitely very much enjoying that. So yeah, I'll quickly recap my reading week. So I first finished This Alien Shore by C.S. Friedman, which is a science fiction mystery, and it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that one. And I'm very excited. I don't know if I mentioned this in my previous clip, but she is actually writing another book in that world randomly 22 years later. And so I'm very excited to see maybe a companion novel. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm definitely very excited to see that there's some other story in this world. So we'll see what happens with that. I definitely enjoyed that, and I'm definitely very interested to see what else C.S. Friedman has written and kind of explore her work some more. And I then DNF'd the audiobook of The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh, mostly just because the audiobook wasn't quite clicking with me, so I want to go back to that physically later on. And I finished Lifting as We Climb by Yvette Dion. Fantastic. Please read that one. Definitely will provide a lot more context than some of the whitewashed history that we get, that is Seneca Falls to 1920, and like through the lens of the white women who were important to the movement at the time, and not other people who were important to the movement at that time, particularly black women who were important to that movement. So it's definitely really, really good to get more context for that. And then I'm like halfway through Born Both by Hida Valoria, and so I'm thoroughly enjoying that. I think it's super interesting, and I'm going to finish that this coming week, so I'll talk about that more in my next reading vlog. But yeah, otherwise just continuing on with Royal Assassin, which will be the story, as I said, for probably the rest of the month. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these or if any of these sound interesting, and let me know how your reading week is going, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.